So, Alolan Sandslash is the first Pokemon that I'll be reviewing on this list that I actually have quite a bit of battle spot experience with. I've been playing around with him a lot, just kind of seeing what he can do, and I'll get into the details more after we discuss his basics. So, if we look at his stats, he actually lost 20 points in special attack, and 10 went into defense and 10 went into special defense when he switched from the regular form to his Alolan form, which is actually a great thing because his special attack was already unusable, so reducing it to 25 really doesn't hurt him at all. His typing is kind of interesting. It's both good and bad because it's arguably the best and worst defensive types in the game together, which, while it only gives him 3 weaknesses, it gives him 2 dual weaknesses, so moves that will probably knock him out in one hit regardless. He's weak to ground, and he's double weak to both fire and fighting, and sadly all 3 of those typings are commonly run in an offensive meta. They're very common coverage moves to have if they're not already stab on your Pokemon. Now, although this is the case, he also has quite a few resistances still, mainly because of his steel typing. Now, for his abilities, Snowcloak really isn't useful for more than the random Haxie battle. His real place where he shines is Slush Rush, and this makes him similar to Tyranitar and Excadrill in Generation 6's OU, in that on his own he's not the best, but set up a Swords Dance, get him in on Hail, and he is going to be blowing through teams because he can run all his extra stats into attack, and he can run Life Orb to do as much damage as possible, because Slush Rush with max speed without maxing out using his nature as well, so you can still run Adamant, not have to run Jolly, you still outspeed max speed Pheromosa, which is absolutely insane because Pheromosa is one of the fastest Pokemon in the game. So the first set I have is my absolute favorite set for this Pokemon. This is the first Pokemon that I bred up and trained to be perfect this generation, and I think it does leave a bit to be desired. So you want to run Life Orb to max out your damage, and Adamant Nature so that you're absolutely max attack, max your speed, and then a little in your special defense just to help you take those hits 1 point better, I suppose. Your main 2 stab moves will be Icicle Crash and Iron Head, both of which have a chance to flinch your opponent, which is actually really useful because you're probably not going to be one-shotting a lot of Pokemon without some kind of boost as well. You can also run Earthquake for coverage, you can hit things like Steel types better, and then run Rock Slide in the first case for flying types and Pokemon like Gyarados that would normally wall you fairly well. You could also run Rapid Spin if your team needed to get rid of rocks. This is especially true for Hail teams because all 4 Pokemon that set up the Hail take 25% from Stealth Rocks, so you really need to keep those away if you're going to be switching this Pokemon and your Hail setter in and out. Past this, Swords Dance is another great move to run on him because every time I used him in Battle Spot, he would either be walled because he simply couldn't do enough damage, and they would just knock him out, or I would run into something like Focus Sash Garchomp, which is very, very common right now, which means Icicle Spear would be better, but it's still not guaranteed to knock out the Garchomp without a Swords Dance. So it's really hard to get this Pokemon fully set up because you have to switch in your Hail setter, which is more than likely going to be Ninetales, but in my case I like to run Vanillux. And why I run Vanillux is I can get Vanillux in turn 1 and just use Explosion, do a lot of damage if not knocking out the opponent's first Pokemon, and then bring in Sandslash with 7 turns of Hail still on the clock because my Vanillux was running the Icy Rock on its Snow Warning. So you still have to use a full turn to set up your Swords Dance to do some damage, otherwise you're not going to be knocking out everything, because regardless of how this Pokemon looks and how fast it may be, 100 base attack only gets you so far. And that's its biggest shortcoming, is they didn't buff its attack, they boosted its defenses. Had they put that 20 special attack into its physical attack, it would be nearly unstoppable. So as far as other coverage for this Pokemon, it actually gets a lot. It gets Knot Slash and Shadow Claw, which do similar damage. It gets Brick Break for the fighting type coverage if you were to need that for your team. It gets Icicle Spear, which, as I mentioned, is kind of a risky move to run because since you're not skill link, it can hit anywhere between 2 and 5 times, which means that if you only hit twice, it's the equivalent of a 50 base power move, but if you hit all 5 times, it's 125 base power, which is ridiculous, but there's a much smaller chance of that happening as there are 2 or 3 times. But you have to hit at least 4 to be stronger than Icicle Crash, which is why I usually prefer Icicle Crash. You also get Leech Life, which can heal you and its bug type coverage, and Poison Jab to help with fairies, especially Tapus like Tapu Koko and Tapu Fini, who would take only neutral damage from your Iron Head, but would take super effective damage from your Poison Jab, even though Tapu Koko would still take super effective damage from your Earthquake. I meant to say Koko if I said Bulu earlier. I apologize. I get the Tapu so mixed up in my head. But I like to have a Pokemon that has an answer for all 4 of them. So Sandslash is actually pretty good against all of the Tapus. The only other set I really have for this Pokemon is to worry less about the Slush Rush. Perhaps you could even run Snow Cloak on this one, but Slush Rush is still a good option if you're running a Hell team. You could run either Leftovers or Assault Vest, something to make you bulkier. Have an Adamant Nature still. Keep your attack all the way up, but run max HP and still a little in special defense. And then have your 4 attacks. You could have Icicle Crash, Iron Head, and Rapid Spin for your rock removing and still your dual stab. And then you could have Leech Life on an Assault Vest set to help you get health back. Or you could run Toxic to help wear your opponents down. Past this, you can actually set the Hail yourself with Sandslash. It does get it as a TM, and while that's not as useful, it could be done if you simply don't have room for a Hail setter on your team. Along with this, you could run Aurora Veil, which is actually really useful, and I'm so sad that they didn't give Vanillux access to Aurora Veil, because bringing it in with an Icy Rock, setting up an Aurora Veil turn 1, and then exploding turn 2 is Sandslash's best bet. But you can't run that. You have to do it with Ninetales and hope that you get knocked out, or you're able to get a free switch in otherwise. So past this, you could also run Rest and Sleep Talk if you really wanted to use that and try to stall your opponent out, especially if they didn't have fire or fighting types, because obviously you're not stalling them out at all. You could also have Metal Burst, which is a non-negative priority counter or mirror coat that does less damage. And so what I mean by that is you should be well versed with counter and mirror coat being moves run by Pokemon like Wobbuffet, so that if you hit them with a physical move, they use counter, you take double the damage that they did. If you hit them with a special move and they hit you with a mirror coat, you take double the damage. Same idea. But with Metal Burst, you can be hit by either physical or special moves, but you only do 1.5 times the damage back. So you need to have a decent amount of health lost for this to knock out or do a lot of damage to your opponent. And along with this, it's not negative priority, so if your opponent is slower than you, this move just fails. The last set that has any possible chance of working successfully is a Curse Gyro Ball set, but this would only really be useful on a Trick Room team, because if you slow down your Sandslash even more, then your opponent can easily revenge kill you with any fire, fighting, or ground type, or anything that hits you neutrally for quite a bit of damage. But if you were able to set up curses, drop your speed even lower, and run, say, minimum speed, and then use Gyro Ball, you would be doing a lot of damage to anything that switched in if you could take the hits. So, in summary, I really do like Alolan Sandslash. It's one of my favorite designs easily. It's a great Pokemon, but it just needs a tiny bit more attack power to really stand out in the meta it's in. And I wish this Pokemon were just a bit stronger, because Beartic is very similar in that it gets Slush Rush, and it is stronger at 130 base attack, but it only has Ice-type Stab, and it has lower speed, which means that if you could just combine the two, keep the typing, keep Beartic's attack, and keep Sandslash's speed, you would have the perfect Hail Pokemon. Unfortunately, that's not the type of world we live in, and hail's not the most viable weather, at least not this generation.